Looked out the window and I saw that building just engulfed in flames.
It was really like frantic, but some people were scared, so everyone was kind of screaming and yelling a little bit.
Students forced to flee in the middle of the night after a suspicious fire in a downtown heritage building. It is not the first time the building has gone up in flames, and fire officials say the property is known to have problems with squatters. Shannon Martin joins us live from Carlton and Jarvis. And Shannon, just a scary night for those students next door to this blaze.
Absolutely. And you know, this building was already in such a state of disrepair. Well, now it is just too dangerous for fire crews to go inside. Check it out behind me. You can see radiators, collapsed walls, giant beams just hanging down now. The damage is extensive. It was around midnight when firefighters were in the thick of it, flames shooting from the roof of this two-story heritage home at 314 Jarvis. A big crowd gathering, many in their pajamas. University of Toronto and Ryerson students who only moved in hours earlier.
And I saw a couple embers and I heard like fire trucks, so I looked out the window and I saw that building just engulfed in flames. Like half the building didn't even see it. They thought it was a drill. But I was like yelling, I'm like, no guys, it's like a real thing. Like, let's hurry down the stairs.
It was really like frantic, but some people were scared, so everyone was kind of screaming and yelling a little bit. And I heard some people say run, some people say, oh, there's a big ass fire outside.
Crews quickly got the flames under control despite facing a number of structural challenges. The heritage home, built in 1865 and once owned by a prominent Toronto family, has long been abandoned. It caught fire at least twice in recent years, including in 2016.
They boarded up the porch. They were basically squatting there.
It's an ongoing issue, with Toronto Fire regularly doing inspections to make sure the home was properly boarded up. The last time they were here, this past July.
Most of the roof was gone on this building to begin with, so as you can see, it's been relatively secured with plywood, but doesn't keep everybody out, so at this time we have no idea what the cause of the fire was.
And they do say there's no evidence right now that anyone was inside at the time, but of course they won't know that, and they won't be able to determine the cause until they can get inside. But they need that heavy equipment to do that, Dwight. That's expected to be here tomorrow, and then they can really begin that investigative work. Yeah, just glad nobody was hurt in that one. Thank you, Shannon.
We had our project archaeologists confirm that, in fact, they were horse bones.
Uncovering pieces of Toronto's past while building future of our transit. Coming up, we'll dig into the story of our city. Plus,
I'm Talia Ricci, and as the province's process of selecting legal pot shops continues, this location barricaded behind me, still associated with cafe, remains on the list. This as others are eliminated. We'll have more on that coming up.
Hurricane Dorian has slowed slightly to a Category 4, but the slow-moving monster storm continues to batter the Bahamas while it edges towards Florida. Dorian parked above Grand Bahama Island overnight, blasting it with heavy rain and 350-kilometer-an-hour gusts. Authorities say it is the most powerful storm to make a direct hit on the Bahamas in recorded history. It tore apart houses and washed away whole neighborhoods with a storm surge of up to 7 meters high. Some people were forced to flee to the attic to escape the rising water. Others got out but were forced to wait in the floodwater for rescue.
That's my back door. 3 inches before the water get in it. Where's my cars? The gas did and all. Gone now. That's the neighbors them.
The Red Cross estimates that at least 13,000 homes have been destroyed in the Bahamas, describing the impact as catastrophic. There are reports of casualties, including a 7-year-old boy who was killed as his family tried to find safety. His sister is still missing. After battering the Bahamas, the wind and rain from Hurricane Dorian are starting to arrive in Florida, where the governor has ordered the evacuation of 9 counties. David Common is in Florida with the latest on preparations there.
It's going to get a lot worse than this. The initial waves of rain and wind from Hurricane Dorian now coming in off the Atlantic across much of the southern Florida coast. It's going to get a lot worse overnight as these winds get much stronger, capable of knocking down power lines, trees, causing considerable damage to buildings, and then the storm surge. All of those waves coming in, rising up and getting perhaps into structures, to buildings, to offices that have got sandbags around them already, metal cladding, plywood up, and that extends quite a bit further inland because the hurricane warnings and watches do go much further inland as those winds will continue. Big problem with this hurricane is how slow it is moving. It's creeping forward even as it churns a destructive path, and so it stays over top of an area for a long time, increasing the amount of destruction that it can wreak. We have seen that schools will be closed through at least Wednesday at this point, that hospitals in this area, many of them have been evacuated, that many people, including in this area, a barrier island, have been told they should leave their homes for their own safety. Bridges are being closed. The lockdown is very much beginning. Floridians have to get through this storm and then the cleanup. We know that there are about 16,000 power workers just in this state alone that have been brought in on standby, staged and ready to help to try to restore that power as quickly as possible, because we know at this point it will almost certainly go down en masse, thousands and thousands of homes and businesses to be affected. And then what happens? Well, according to the projections, the storm continues moving north towards Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, but that's taking us several more days down the road. David Common, CBC News, Palm Beach, Florida.
Let's check in with Nick Cernkovich now. And Nick, we heard David Common talk about where this might be heading. You have an update of where it is now and where it is headed.
Yeah, and you heard David Common talking about how slow this system is moving, and that's why it's dropping so much rain in one particular spot at a time. So right now we're talking about the Bahamas, and the thing really hasn't moved. And you can see this loop here is a 3-hour loop, and the eye barely moves at all. So in this case, it's not just the winds, but it's the heavy, heavy rainfall that continues to pour down on the Bahamas. Now, as we move through into the future, we're actually going to see the system slowly start to pick its speed up. Right now, the speed is roughly about 1 kilometer per hour. This one's showing stationary at this point as Category 4 winds. Now, if I put this into motion, it'll start to increase its speed a little bit. You notice it stays off the coast, and a couple things working in our favor. Although the rainfall is quite extensive, is slightly less in the way of storm surge in some areas because you're not getting so much of a push in terms of the speed of this thing. Once it gets up closer to about Georgia, the speed does pick up, though, as it gets swept up into sort of the mid-latitudes, and at that point it moves up into the North Atlantic. Now, with that being said, we'll have to watch what the effects of this are as it goes up the coast of the U.S., but also into Atlantic Canada toward the end of the week. So we'll keep an eye on that. For us back in Toronto, this is really what we're looking at here. Right now, it doesn't look like Dorian is going to affect us whatsoever coming up in the next 5 days. For us, we're talking about back-to-school forecast, seasonal temperatures, but we've got slightly cooler weather on the way as we move through the next little while. Right now, we're sitting at 23 degrees. Overnight tonight, again, a slightly cooler night at 12 degrees. Still a few showers out there right now that I expect to see in the GTA coming up over the next couple of hours. Then tomorrow, 24 degrees, but evening rain and thunderstorms. We'll talk more about your back-to-school forecast and what you can expect in the next 5 days coming up in just a bit.
Thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.
Some of the winners of the most recent pot lottery are not winners anymore. They had until last Wednesday to submit their documents. 12 failed to do so and were disqualified, but one that's still standing is at the same address as an illegal dispensary, which has been repeatedly shut down by police. Talia Ricci has more.
While many businesses remain closed on Labor Day Monday, the cafe locations on Bloor and Harvard seem to still be operating, which hasn't gone unnoticed by area residents.
Especially walking home from practice at night, it wasn't necessarily the most safe or accepted thing going on. You could kind of tell that it was a different clientele than is what is necessarily in the area.
104 Harvard is still labeled as cafe, and the location is still in the running to open as a legal pot shop. Recently, one Toronto applicant withdrew from the province's lottery process and another was eliminated.
In this particular case, they're going to look at the applicants, whether or not they're associated with cafe, and if so, do they have the moral fortitude that is required to successfully hold a license and operate a store.
The man behind the Harvard Street application has said to CBC News that he has no connection to cafe or the people behind it. People connected to that cafe location have been charged under the Ontario Cannabis Control Act, including the landlord. In a statement, the AGCO says it will only license applicants who meet all legal and regulatory requirements, adding this assessment includes police and background checks on the applicants and on any other interested parties, as well as ongoing reviews for lottery rule violations. Back when the 42 lottery winners were first announced, Mark Srega with the city's investigative services says he was taken aback.
But the fact that they would have the boldness to submit a license, that is somewhat very surprising and frustrating.
Abby Roach didn't get picked in the latest lottery. She doesn't believe the lottery system has been fair.
We are absolutely ready. We're fully staffed. We're financed. We're ready to convert. We've waited for 20 years. I fought for this for 20 years. For people who really played by the rules and the spirit of fairness of the lottery, we kind of got, shafted.
Mayor John Tory's office also responded today, saying it's raised concerns with the province about the lottery results, including applicants that have been associated with illegal cannabis sales and locations near schools. Talia Ricci, CBC News, Toronto.
It is the end of the line and the end of an era for an iconic Toronto streetcar.
As we get older, we come to realize that nothing lasts forever, and there is a certain sadness when an era ends.
They are officially known as articulated light rail vehicles, but to many Torontonians, they are affectionately called the bendy streetcars. And just over an hour ago, the last two in service were officially retired after making a final run along Queen Street, the TTC giving free rides as a way to mark the occasion. We talked to some of the passengers on board for the journey.
What are your impressions of the streetcar?
It feels kind of smooth, but not really.
So is this a thumbs up or thumbs down for your first time?
I'm sad that it's going away. I want to ride on it more.
And what about you?
I'm surprised I'm not the only streetcar nerd in Toronto. Like talking to this guy here, everyone here is streetcar nerds. It's awesome. Yeah. I thought there was going to be like 10 people maybe, and it's full.
We're all streetcar nerds. If we grew up in Toronto, the bendy streetcars have been in service since 1988, and I remember when they launched. Pieces of history as old as 5,000 years have been uncovered in Midtown Toronto. The discoveries happened while crews have been working on the Eglinton Crosstown LRT. Lisa Shing explains what the artifacts have been able to teach us about the area.
We are here at Eglinton and Dufferin. It's where a lot of the work is being done on the Crosstown LRT. And all along the way, workers have been digging up artifacts that showcase the history of this community. And today, we're going to be checking some of them out.
As workers dig the tunnel that will eventually be the Crosstown LRT, they sometimes are held up because they continue to unearth various items.
And they found what looked like some bones.
Bones that were found at the Fairbank site at Dufferin and Eglinton. They also found a horse hoof, a cow pelvis. When the crew finds something, work stops. They call this man, who then calls the project archaeologist to see if police need to be called in.
We had our project archaeologists confirm that in fact they were horse bones, so that we didn't need to call the police or the coroner. There was an old dumping pit.
That dumping pit over at the Kennedy site had various glass bottles and pottery from an old farm in the area before it was developed.
These are definitely all pretty cool.
The most significant find, a 5,000-year-old hunting camp, including ceramics and stone tools.
And they were all cataloged. There was over 2,800 found. They were cataloged and stored.
Heritage Toronto's Caitlin Wainwright says the artifacts tell a story.
It also is a chance to reflect and say, okay, what other histories have been lost over time, and where might there have been other human activity?
The work won't be finished for a few years yet. After several delays, Metrolink says the final project should be complete by fall of 2021. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
It could be a big night for Bianca Andreescu. The GT18 has a chance to reach the semifinals at the U.S. Open. She beat former world #1 Caroline Wozniacki on Saturday to reach the round of 16. She's the only Canadian left in the final Grand Slam of the season. The 19-year-old will face American Taylor Townsend at 9 p.m. at Arthur Ashe Stadium. It is not back to school in Hong Kong. Tens of thousands of students boycott the first day of class as Chinese state media reports that the end is near for pro-democracy protesters. We'll bring you that story coming up.
The weather update is brought to you by Train Extreme Conditions Testing. It's hard to stop a train, really hard. Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
In Hong Kong, the first day of school after summer break turned into a mass boycott. Tens of thousands of students lending their support to the ongoing anti-government demonstrations. Protests have been growing despite a police crackdown, arrests, and mounting pressure from Beijing on the territory's leadership. Adrian Arsenault has more now from Hong Kong.
So the school year was supposed to start today, and yet here they are, the students of Hong Kong back out chanting on the streets. High school students, college students, thousands of them are on strike all across the city. They've been joined in some cases by the doctors and nurses. If you have a look at this crowd, some of the protesters here are clearly ready for more than just sitting and listening to speeches and chanting. Not even a swirling typhoon has managed to discourage the people from coming back onto the streets, not even the violence of this weekend. And while we're above ground here, below ground, there is a fair amount of chaos as well. Protesters have once again been swarming the transit stations here. Some of the protesters blocking the doorways to subway trains, the police chasing them throughout. Some of the arrests continue today. And watching all of this, of course, are Hong Kong's authorities, who are frustrated and furious. The number 2 in Hong Kong suggesting again that they're not ruling out emergency laws being put into place, that they believe law and order must be restored immediately. The big concern is, what will Beijing do? Chinese state media released a statement earlier within the last 24 hours suggesting quite clearly that, quote, the end is near for these protesters, that is a red line that China says must not be crossed, and that includes a challenge to China's sovereignty. Not only is Beijing furious at gatherings like this, it really is angry at some of the images that have come out this weekend, particularly the tearing down and burning of a Chinese flag. That sort of stuff is not going to be tolerated. At least that's the message it wants to pass. And October the 1st, 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, the last thing China wants is images of this sort of unrest floating throughout the world leading up to that date. Adrian Arsenault, CBC News, Hong Kong.
In an audio recording obtained by Reuters of a closed-door meeting in Hong Kong, the city's leader says there is no deadline from Beijing to end the unrest ahead of the October 1st National Day celebrations.
We have made special arrangements. There will be a 1st of October National Day celebrations, but still having a lot of disruptions. So we are going for a modest but solemn type of celebrations on the 1st of October, which means that they and ourselves have no expectation that we could clear up this thing before the 1st of October.
Carrie Lam is under pressure from the Chinese leadership to quickly resolve the ongoing crisis, even as she faces calls from protesters to step down. She says if she had a choice, she would quit. Lam also suggested that China has no plan to deploy its military on Hong Kong streets. World leaders have been closely watching to see if Beijing will take that drastic step to crack down on the ongoing protests.
Today marks the end of the summer break for school-age kids. I'm Greg Ross at the X, where thousands of those kids are doing what they can to enjoy every last second before class resumes tomorrow. We'll have more coming up.
Labor Day marks the last day of summer vacation for students and the last day of the CNE. That's where our Greg Ross is right now. And Greg, the gates have closed, but that's not stopping the kids down there from soaking up these last few seconds of summer.
Absolutely, Dwight. It is incredibly packed here. I mean, there are so many kids, thousands and thousands of them walking around here, enjoying these last minutes. You mentioned it, the gates are closed. They're not allowing anybody else back in, but the people that are here don't seem to want to leave. And I think a big reason for that is because a lot of them know that they have to go back to school tomorrow. They're not ready for it to end. Let's face it, this is not the official end of summer. We still have a few more weeks left. But for those kids who will be in class tomorrow, it sure feels like the end.
Elijah Tomlinson spent the last day of his summer break winning prizes on the Midway. He starts grade 4 tomorrow.
What did you win there?
A poo emoji.
Oh, okay. Is that kind of how you feel about having to go back to school tomorrow?
Yes.
Tomlinson was not alone in that sentiment.
I personally don't like school. It's not like my favorite thing, so.
Henry Stein may not be looking forward to the start of a new school year, but his dad, Jared, is.
And Dad's over there, he's smiling, he's so happy.
Thank God.
He's taking happiness on my sadness.
Fortunately, the X provides plenty of distractions for kids, like the food.
What do you got there?
Cotton candy.
Are you getting any of that in your mouth?
Yeah.
Jalen Stevenson kept his focus on the rides today. The scarier, the better.
It helps me keep my mind off of school, especially.
Rob Macaron and his 2 kids came in from Oakville on the GO train with their bikes.
The Hornet, ladies and gentlemen!
First, they watched the air show and then went for a bike ride along the waterfront.
Great day for the family and see some planes and wonderful day for bike riding.
Paige Daly didn't want the day to end, but at the very least, she's hoping to keep her face paint on an extra day to show it off to her new classmates in senior kindergarten.
Would you rather just not wash your face and leave that on for school tomorrow?
Leave that on.
Leave it on? What do you think of that, Mom? Could you just leave that on for school tomorrow?
I don't know about that.
You wanted to stay in the dip without coming back, that's how you went.
The organizers here at the X say they're expecting tens of thousands of people to come through the gates here on Labor Day, but they're saying the numbers are way up this year, up 5% from last year. They're saying that they're estimating about 1.5 million people have come to enjoy the X this year, Dwight.
Always a fun time. Have a last corn dog for us there, Greg. Thank you, buddy. The opening of 2 new schools in City Place has been pushed back again. The city says construction has been delayed because of strikes involving several trades working on the project. The site is supposed to be home to Bishop MacDonnell Catholic Elementary School and Jean Lum Public School. They are now expected to be ready by January. They were meant to be open for the first day of school tomorrow. Right now, students and teachers are being temporarily housed at Nelson Mandela Public School and St. Mary Elementary School. Meanwhile, a community center and child care center that are also part of the project won't be complete until the spring. The TDSB says though the delays are outside their control, they apologize for the inconvenience. It has been taking place for 125 years, thousands coming out today to march in the annual Labor Day parades. Organizers say fair wages and fighting cuts to health care and education remain their top priorities. Daniel Clark has more.
We're here today in response to some of the terrible decisions that the Ford government's making.
Advocates and officials united in support for workers' rights.
If you look back at history, from the 8-hour workday to paternity leave, labor has been front and center, building a safer place for people to live and work. And that work carries on today, no matter what.
Provincial funding cuts have forced the TDSB to propose eliminating some 300 positions, including teachers, principals, coaches, and custodial staff. In response, school support workers across the province are voting on whether to strike.
And that is something that we
hadn't hoped to need to do, but it's come to pass that we do need to do it. We've had almost 2 weeks of bargaining, 14 days of bargaining with the government, and unfortunately we've reached kind of a bit of a stalemate. But we have a no concession mandate, and we provide really key services in these communities. And what we need the government and the trustees associations to understand is that our job security is also the security for the services that we provide to our students, our schools, and our communities.
A push and pull all too familiar in this crowd.
Here we are, we're always taking, one step forward, 2 steps back, unfortunately, depending on the flavor of the government of the day.
Toronto Mayor John Tory weighed in on the battle over cuts.
Premier Ford has some tough decisions to make, but having said that, I think there are ways you can make these decisions that don't involve a huge conflict for people. I think you can sit down and reason together.
The Ontario Minister of Labour attended and had this to say.
I want to work with labour groups right across the province, and I've said quite clearly that my approach to labour is to be fair and responsible. So fair to workers, responsible to taxpayers.
Daniel Clark, CBC News, Toronto.
As you just saw, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh marched in today's parade, and he used the opportunity to make his pitch to voters.
One more, give it a little fist up in the air. Yes.
Singh vowed to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour if elected. He also promised to make sure contract workers get equal pay and benefits with permanent employees. The other two party leaders spent Labor Day making campaign-style stops in Hamilton. Hecklers harassed Justin Trudeau as he marched in the Labor Day parade. The Prime Minister with a contingent from Labour's International when they were met by groups of protesters. While he managed to do some glad-handing, security decided the safest course of action was to get him into a limo and away from potential trouble.
Came to the right game, man. Well, I was at the game yesterday in Regina.
Conservative leader Andrew Scheer tried to blend in as he partook of a Steel Town tradition, the Labor Day Classic between the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the Toronto Argos. Scheer was accompanied by former Ticat Peter Layakowski, one of the party's candidates in next month's election. We will continue to track the issues that matter to you as the federal election draws near, and that includes a new CBC election newsletter. It's called Canada Votes, and it's your weekly tip sheet as we count down to the big day. You can sign up at cbc.ca/election newsletter. We'll deliver it to your inbox every Sunday evening. In the UK, it's shaping up to be a standoff in Parliament as Prime Minister Boris Johnson prepares to take on the opposition and possibly some of his own MPs in what might be the biggest Brexit battle yet. Cameron McIntosh has more now from London.
Outside of 10 Downing Street, the protest was large and noisy, trying to drown out the Prime Minister as he spoke to the country.
We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts.
Digging in as Parliament, soon to be prorogued, sets to return for a high-stakes week amid questions whether his government will even survive.
I want to see the government fall and a general election so that the country can have a say in who governs them.
Essentially, he's stopping MPs from debating what is one of the most serious issues of our time.
It's an example of the tension that's gripping this country. With Parliament set to resume for just a few short days, opposition parties are set to introduce legislation, likely their last chance to block a no-deal Brexit.
There are Conservative MPs poised to help them, also intent on stopping a no-deal Brexit. They could topple Johnson's one-seat majority. In spite of warnings, they will not be allowed to run again as Conservatives. No deal. This evening, Johnson called an emergency cabinet meeting, reportedly to discuss a snap election. Over the sound of those protests, he publicly urged rebel Conservatives not to go along with the opposition.
If they do, they will plainly chop the legs out from under the UK position and make any further negotiation absolutely impossible.
A snap election would require the approval of the opposition.
This week could be our last chance. We are working with other parties to do everything necessary to pull our country back from the brink. Then we need a general election.
A minor distraction in all of this, Johnson's new dog moved into 10 Downing Street today. Whether he and his owner are in for a long stay is not certain. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, London.
We all know first day of school tomorrow, Nick. Will the kids be heading back to class wishing they were still on summer vacation because it's going to be so nice out there?
Well, you know what, despite the weather, I think they would all still wish they're on summer vacation. I know, I remember when I was a kid, I certainly did. Anyway, that being said, the weather is going to cooperate for back to school both for the morning and also for the afternoon. The rain comes tomorrow evening. In fact, we are looking at a few showers tonight as well. So we'll talk about that and then we'll get to the forecast in a sec. Little line of showers that are just moving in across the north end of the GTA right now. This is pretty short-lived and fast-moving, but you might get a good shot of rain showers coming up over the next couple of hours. It does dissipate, though, as we head into the evening tonight. It's all along a cold front that's moving through the region. That's bringing with it slightly drier weather, although you're not going to see much of a change along this particular front for tomorrow anyway. As we move through the next 24 hours, those rain showers dissipate. Then we're looking at just some cloud cover for tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow afternoon, the risk of a few spotty showers, but it's really not until about 10 p.m. tomorrow where we've got a line of showers and thunderstorms moving across the GTA. And when we see that, it will clear out by the morning, but it's going to drop with it about 15, maybe 20 millimeters of rain, depending on where you are. So these are local showers, so you know, some areas are going to see more than others, but there's a broad look at what you can expect there in terms of the forecast for tomorrow. Winds as well, by the way, they're going to pick up in advance of this, gusting to about 50 or 60 kilometers per hour by tomorrow evening. Right now we're sitting at 23 degrees in the GTA, and that's pretty much where we hit for a high, off a couple degrees of what we had for our high. As we move through tomorrow, we're looking at temperatures tonight in around 12 degrees or so. By tomorrow afternoon, we're back up to about 24 degrees, so that's bang on seasonal, but then they drop in the 20s as we head toward the weekend, and look at those overnight lows, single digits in some days. Dwight?
We don't like single digits, not yet.
We're not ready for them.
Thank you, Nick.
You bet.
A fire 10 years ago almost shut down Chapman's ice cream factory in southwestern Ontario for good, but a community came together to save it. As Philippe Lishanek explains, it is a story with a sweet ending for a town, community, and family.
They're up in the rafters welding, and a spark lit it up, and we couldn't stop it.
The plan was to expand the more than a century-old wooden building that served as home to Chapman's ice cream since 1973.
And I thought, we'll be all right. There's cold storage, there's lots of ice, it's very cold. There's ice cream in there, it'll put out the fire. Oh no.
1 out of every 3 people in the town of 1,400 worked there. Many remember seeing billowing smoke over the town as the factory burned to the ground.
Watching to see what's going to happen, wondering what will happen to this town if we lose, such a big employer.
Now, some business owners would be tempted to pack it all in after such a catastrophe, but the Chapman story is taught in business schools as a case study in not only how to survive after a disaster, but thrive in the aftermath.
I mean, there just was not a moment's hesitation of, we won't quit. We will carry on for our people, the town, everything else.
The family says now, looking back, they made some smart decisions. They had business interruption insurance and enough inventory to keep them going while they rebuilt. But they also had plain good luck.
I was going through the mail, and there's a flyer that said, fire sale of an ice cream factory in Florida. Big, huge, gigantic factory. So it was just this weird kind of coincidence.
Within 7 weeks, Chapman's was producing ice cream again, and no one missed a single paycheck. Today, the new plant, called Phoenix, is the heart of an expanded facility employing twice as many people. Strolling the shop floor, Ashley Chapman knows most of them by name. He says 10 years ago, after the family recipes were destroyed in the fire, it was the mix masters on the shop floor who knew all of them by heart.
And that's why, as a company, then and now, we believe that people are the strongest thing that a company has, and you got to treat them well.
And Chapman's has given back to the community, donating millions to hospitals, sports facilities, and schools, because the family knows its success is rooted in this community. Phil Bishanok, CBC News, Markdale, Ontario.
The only Mayday call we received was the vessel was engulfed in flames. That's all we received.
A fiery emergency at sea off the coast of California. Dozens are missing after a boat carrying recreational divers goes up in flames. We'll bring you the latest after the break. We're learning tonight the man who went on a deadly shooting rampage in Texas over the weekend had just been fired from his job.
Right after that firing, he called 911, Odessa Police Department's 911, and so did his employer. And basically they were complaining on each other because they had a disagreement over the firing.
The shooter left his workplace before police arrived. Moments later, he was pulled over by an officer for a traffic violation. He took off and began randomly firing at people on the street. He killed 7 and injured more than 20 others, including a 17-month-old girl. Eventually, he was killed by police. Investigators also revealing today the shooter made what was described as a rambling call to the FBI before he opened fire, but they say he didn't make any threats of violence. An FBI agent said the man was on a long spiral down and that his firing didn't trigger the shootings. Many are feared dead after a dive boat with at least 38 people on board caught fire off the coast of Southern California. U.S. Coast Guard have recovered at least 4 bodies so far. 5 crew members managed to escape by jumping into the water, but most of the passengers remain unaccounted for. Ellen Moore has the details.
The flames alone are harrowing enough. Now consider the more than 30 passengers asleep below deck.
Right now they're conducting shoreline searches for any available survivors.
But hope is dwindling. Only 5 crew members are known to have escaped.
The crew was actually already awake and on the bridge and they jumped off.
They're now being treated for injuries.
Very surreal at the moment. When I came over here, I tried to get a hold of them and their number had been disconnected, the Coast Guard, or had been changed. So I imagine there's a lot of people running around trying to get some information.
The boat, called Conception, was a scuba diving vessel docked off Santa Cruz Island near the Southern California coast. Dean Child says he sailed on the Conception for 12 years.
It's a top-notch outfit. I can't believe that this happened to them. It's just horrible to think that people could have been trapped down in that bunk room.
There's no word yet on what started the blaze. Coast Guard officials say the boat was in full compliance and had no prior violations. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Washington.
So you have deer hide, moose hide. You have the smell of smoke, smoked hides. You have the jingles that move in the wind.
It's a memorial to honor missing and murdered Indigenous women. Coming up, we'll bring you to the art installation at Allen Gardens, all designed by Indigenous women. Stay with us. We'll be right back. The Assembly of First Nations wants to make sure Indigenous issues are front and center this election campaign. It's preparing to release a wish list for political parties, but as Olivia Stefanovic tells us, there are concerns not as many will be as eager to vote this time around.
You know, it's interesting that we're standing here, and one of the prime ministers behind me is John Diefenbaker.
Nearly 60 years after all Indigenous people got the right to vote, under Conservative Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Perry Bellegarde, is reminding candidates about the political capital at hand.
So, simple message to any member of parliament that wants to be a member of parliament: First Nations people vote, so therefore our vote matters, our priorities matter.
Almost 62% of Indigenous people went to a polling station in 2015. Their votes flipped more than 20 ridings, most in favor of the Liberals.
That becomes some political power, and we want to use that power to influence party platforms.
At the top of his list of priorities, climate change, reducing the number of Indigenous offenders behind bars, and implementing all the recommendations of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Bellegarde is not backing any particular party, while other Indigenous leaders are not shying away from making their choice known.
So what's at stake is that if the Liberals lose and we lose this Prime Minister who believes in it so much in his heart and his actions, we could be setting ourselves back for several decades.
But this analyst is skeptical about turnout this election.
I think it's going to shift back to pre-2015 sort of distribution.
He says the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the departure of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's first and only female Indigenous cabinet minister have dampened enthusiasm.
If he's willing to do that to one of his own who is so close to him, then is this really the most important relationship? So that question lingers and sort of leaves a sour taste.
But given the tight polls, the Indigenous vote could still prove decisive come October. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
If you've been around Allen Gardens this summer, you may have noticed the colorful banners on display. They've been designed by 15 Indigenous women artists, and they're part of a memorial honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
A lot of these Indigenous artists, a lot of Indigenous people came together to create something so beautiful. We thought it was important to show the past and where we sort of came from, the kind of harmful effects that colonizers had.
Some people do find the history to be a little in your face sometimes, but I think that's important. And really what it is, and I think about this installation, is to spark conversations.
And then to come into the park, there seems to be a different energy now in this park. And I love watching everybody just take their time, looking at each of the banners. They're absorbing the memorial to the missing and murdered, but they're also, they're just feeling so positive about Allen Gardens, and that was really our intent.
Recognizing our history and our experiences, because historically we haven't had these opportunities. It's really about that recognition that we have a space, we have a place here. And really it's a recognition of the roots of the place.
We wanted to create an act of civic beauty, but also create a memorial to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. So you have deer hide, moose hide, you have the smell of smoke, smoked hides, you have the jingles that move in the wind, you have the ribbons, we have roadkill bones. There's such an amazing orchestra of sounds and texture.
It's kind of just like a great reminder of what we wanted to represent, and seeing people stop and take pictures, it's kind of just validates that, and they'll pass along whatever they get from these banners as well.
Beautiful. The installation will remain in Allen Gardens until the Sisters in Spirit Vigil on October 4th. It was a mix of rain and shine this weekend, but what is in store for the first day of school? We'll check in one last time with Nick. But first...
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Whoa, oh my God!
That is kind of cool. The sky and social media both lighting up over the weekend in the Edmonton area. A meteor streaked across the sky there late Saturday. One expert in the U.S. says that based on the images he's seen, it may have been the bow-light meteor, which can be as bright as a full moon. We'll be right back. As the CNE winds down, we decided to take a look at the company that helps to run it. North American Midway Entertainment is trying to change the reputation of the old Carney. Their team includes a lot of young adults that they say have a positive attitude towards their job and the people they serve. They get to see the world, make new friends, and save some money.
You guys can come on up. Go ahead, jump in right there. You too as well, right? Sit on the side. My name is Nico Young. I work for the Crazy Mouse roller coaster for North American Midway in Canada. Everything about this ride is cool. It spins, it's got loops, it jumps up and down. It's awesome. I think working in this environment it's fun all the time. It's a great experience for anybody looking to travel and meet new people. I think it's a wonderful experience.
Well, you know, I started in 1977, you know, and I guess that there was kind of a connotation of what a carnival worker was in North America. And I guess that we're trying to somewhat improve that mold or even change that mold a little bit as time goes along, and we're chipping away at it every day by providing great customer service, really good employees.
One of the things that North American Midway has truly done is brought that image right away from the traditional carny to a very professional, well-dressed, well-appointed, well-spoken individual.
Can I just say Absoluwa? Good. I'm Marinelle van Pletsen. I'm from South Africa, Western Cape, Plettenberg Bay. So we started in June. We were in Calgary. I love the horses and just the scenery. Then we went to Winnipeg. And then we are now in Toronto, where we went to Niagara Falls. That was like the best thing I've ever seen. So it's really, really good. And now we're going to London next week.
You know, this is a really exciting landscape to work in, and they're traveling with a whole bunch of people that are their age. And so it makes the camaraderie of being in this makes it kind of like a family atmosphere.
With all the money we made, we're going back home, take a long vacation, and then we're going to study. I'm going to study hairdressing.
Seemed nicer than the carnies that were there when I was growing up. Anyway, so first day of school, kids are wondering what to do. How should they dress? Shorts?
I know. Well, unfortunately, we're getting into that time of year where like the evening temperatures and the morning temperatures are a bit cooler, right? So the morning is going to be a bit cool. It'll probably be around 13, 14 degrees when you head out to school. But by the afternoon, we're up to 24 degrees. So it's a nice day in store. Shouldn't see any rain showers tomorrow, but tomorrow afternoon for the commute and also for the kids coming back and forth. But by the time we hit tomorrow evening, we're looking at more in the rain again, and then it starts to cool down toward the end of the week.
Your little guy doesn't start tomorrow. He's got another year or so?
He's got another year to go, yeah. He's still in
good.
daycare.
And I got one going to the last year of high school, buddy.
Oh, yeah.
No, buddy. That's it for our show tonight. Thank you for watching. Mike Wise has your next local newscast at 11 tonight. Have a great night, everybody, and back to school tomorrow, kids. Sorry, summer's over. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.